Morning.
Good morning.
Hi, everyone. Just going to give everyone a minute to get connected, and we may have some people joining as we go. Diana, if you could just keep an eye on that.
Sure.
Thank you. I'll try and keep an eye out too. All right, we'll get started. I want to respect everyone's time. We've only got half an hour together here today. Thank you so much for joining. We're here from the Office of Educational Effectiveness. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about going beyond Bloom's and exploring different taxonomies for assessment. I'm Krista Emma. I'm one of the Educational Effectiveness Specialists in OEE. I'm joined by my wonderful colleague, Diana. If you'd like to introduce yourself, Diana, I don't know if you want to come off mute.
Diana Jernigan-Breedy. I'm the other specialist on the team.
Great. So I always start our workshops off with objectives. It wouldn't be OEE if we didn't have objectives. We're hoping by joining us today, you get to learn a little bit about the different taxonomies and frameworks related to teaching, learning, and assessment. That perhaps you'll be able to select a taxonomy or framework that resonates most for you in your work or your discipline, and then be able to apply those concepts to your program or unit learning assessment plan. So I know we're going to go beyond Bloom's, but just before we get into that, I wanted to make sure we're all sort of on the same page about what a taxonomy is. Essentially, it's a framework to classify different learning objectives, skills, or knowledge into different levels of complexity. And we use it a lot in education to inform the design process of curriculum, instructional activities, and the assessment process. It actually has its roots in behavioral and educational psychology. So dating back to J.B. Watson, B.F. Skinner, and that importance of generating well-defined learning processes that can result in observable and measurable results. Taxonomies and these frameworks also support backward design principles because you're starting with that endpoint in mind, not just focusing on content, but actually focusing on the skills you want students to walk out the door with. It promotes equity because it takes that sort of internal, maybe implicit goal that you have in mind for your students and really makes it explicit for all learners, regardless of where they're coming from or how they've been prepared for your class or program. And it is one of those foundational components of the program assessment plan. So if you're coming to us from an academic unit where you actually submit those reports each year, you'll know that that's really step one, articulating goals and objectives. And once again, before we go beyond Bloom's, we're going to recap what Bloom's is, just so that everyone's starting from the same place.
All right, so Bloom's has been around for quite some time. We started in 1956 by Benjamin Bloom. His perspective is really from an educator or teacher standpoint. It's a hierarchy in the structure, so we always know about the pyramid, which we'll look at in the next slide. We move from lower skills, and you finish one lower skill, and you move up to higher order thinking skills. And there's 3 domains, so we technically tend to focus on the cognitive, which is the pyramid, but there's 2 other aspects, the affective and the psychomotor. So there goes that pyramid where you're starting with the lower level of knowledge, which is usually retaining information. And then you move up to, from comprehension, application, and then you're considered an expert when you get to evaluation. So there are some quips with Bloom's because there's this idea of you get to the top, you now know everything, but we know that usually when you get to the top, you now have more content, you may want to explore more ideas, and then you have to go back to, in a sense, the bottom of the pyramid. So it's not that you have regressed in skill, it's just that you are continuing your learning. So the other 2 subsets of Bloom's is affective and psychomotor, which are assumed to be rolled into the cognitive. So when, for example, the responding under affective, it's really how your students are responding to the information that you are teaching them. And receiving is how well they are receiving the information that you are giving them. The psychomotor once again, is assumed to have been filtered into the cognitive. So my favorite is the guided response, where you are literally following directions to complete a task. So I always think of putting together, say, IKEA furniture. You're following directions to be able to complete the bookshelf or the cabinet in the end. So you're following those directions. You're going from lower to higher order thinking skills.
Okay, so then we've got Bloom's 2.0, what I call the remix. This one was revised in 2001 by Lauren Anderson and David Krathwohl. Anderson was actually a student of Bloom's, and Krathwohl was part of the original team that developed Bloom's along with Benjamin Bloom. So one of the big changes from the original taxonomy to the revised is that it shifts the language and positions it as more active verbs instead of those sort of inactive nouns to better reflect the students' cognitive processes as they're moving through that pyramid. It can be depicted as that traditional pyramid or as more of an intersectional 2D model, which we'll see on the next slide. And instead of having knowledge as the base level of the pyramid, it actually sort of removes it from the model and says, this is a foundation that you need before you can even get to that first level. And they classify it into 4 dimensions. So talking about knowledge that is factual, conceptual, procedural, and metacognitive. And here you can see that traditional pyramid structure where the language has changed. So instead of knowledge, we've got remember, and then moving up the ladders there, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, create. And then this one, which I actually like a little bit better, shows that's more of a 2D model where the cognitive process is intersecting with those knowledge domains, and you can kind of look for the right kind of verb that matches the intersecting points. And then once again, we've got this comparison just to emphasize how it's changed over time. Not only did we shift from that noun to the verb form, but we've added a higher level. So that evaluation level that Diana was talking about as sort of the prior peak has shifted down a rung, and instead we've got create as the top level. The theory being that if you have mastered the content, then you should be able to come up with your own theories or create your own product in the end. Now into the fun stuff. Thanks.
So I like things a lot, right? Because it's more student-centered. It's coming from their perspective of what significant learning really is and what those experiences are. And it's relational. So when I think of things, I think of a flower, right? So in the middle is the significant learning, but the petals are all the different components. So for Finks, there are 6 components that are relational. They come together, they ebb and flow to really give a true perspective of how students are doing. Now, these are more soft skills that you're assessing, like leadership, interpersonal skills, communication, adaptability, but they all work together. So here goes that beautiful flower that I was talking about and the petals, and you see how they loop together and they really are relational. So the 6 categories, we'll start with the petal of foundational knowledge. So this is what we understand and remember. If we were thinking about Bloom's, this would be the lowest level. Application is applying knowledge to real situations through critical thinking. You're really able to apply what you've been learning to different contexts. Integration, you're making connections between ideas, learning, and life experiences. So you're putting things into context. My favorite part of Finks is the human dimension. It's really human-centered. It's exploring like personal and social implications. You may see this as self-reflections. If a student is going through an internship, they may self-reflect either through journal writing or just through field processing and notes to tell you how they have changed throughout the process. Maybe you'll use more indirect assessments such as surveys to get an idea of how students are doing or even feedback, focus groups to get feedback on ways to make changes. Then there's the caring part of why students should care about the information that you're teaching them. So you want to always make sure that there's a connection to the information that you're giving, that it's always applicable as to why it's so important to learn this. And then learning how to learn is really wrapping all of this together, that you have now created a student that has learner agency. They're continuing their quest of learning, and they really are lifelong learners. So this is just some verbs that you may use as you are trying to create those program learning objectives. The human dimension, the caring, you may see more if it was say, an SBC type course where these are your plus categories like EXP plus, your SBS plus. You can also see in like your 300 and 400 level courses where it's more concerned about the student and how the content that you're teaching is impacting.
And I would add, this is a great resource that we pulled from U Buffalo's website. We collaborate with them a lot on program assessment topics. Some of these action verbs in the chart are more measurable than others. There might be a few in here that if you threw in your program assessment plan, we might, have some feedback about. So I'd say take it with a grain of salt and then think about, those indirect assessment methods. If you're doing something that is more effective in nature, there may not be a direct way of measuring that and reporting it objectively, but thinking about, reflections, self-assessment of students, those surveys where they give you feedback. Those are ways that you can get at some of those things as well. Okay, so then moving on to Webb's depth of knowledge framework. This was developed by Norman Webb and another educational researcher and psychologist in 1997. And it's used to classify activities according to the level of rigor and the complexity, the cognitive complexity that would be needed to complete the task. And it was originally intended to align really K through 12 standards to the appropriately challenging assessment methods. It uses 4 main levels, which are often depicted as like a staircase, an ascending staircase. And the real key to Webb is that the depth is more focused on the context of that learning objective statement rather than that operative verb. So compared to Bloom's, what kind of thinking is needed to complete the task? And then Webb's, how deeply do you need to understand the content to complete that task?
So Krista mentioned that it's ascending, but it can also be descending as well. So with Webb's, the idea is that as you are thinking and creating and learning, you will go through each one of these steps, and maybe you're doing, DOK1 and DOK4, and it's fine, right? There's no idea of you have to complete one level in its entirety before you can get to 2, 3, or 4. So in this PLO, usually when you see the word identify, it's automatically thought of as a low-level skill, which it can be if you're considering just recall and reproduction, right? So here you're asking a student to literally tell you to identify the structure. That's something that they would have remembered from coursework, right? So they're recalling, and that's pretty much the heart of that particular PLO. But you can build on this PLO where you're identifying and then using more of a strategic thinking. So you may see the one that's in blue probably in like a 100 level course, whereas you may see the green more in a 300 or 400 level course. So here you are constantly building on what you're knowing. So you're identifying to then show an impact. You're then showing some kind of strategic thinking, analysis to strengthen this particular PLO.
Okay, so this one is actually my favorite of the bunch that we're talking about today, Perry's and Baxter-Magolda's stages of undergraduate cognitive development. So this was originally created by William Perry in 1968 and then further refined by Marcia Baxter-Magolder in 1992. It focuses on sort of this holistic development of the student throughout their time in undergraduate years, could be applied to graduate school as well, and their development of intellectual, ethical skills, as well as the formation of their personal identity, their beliefs and values as informed by their education. It's often more typically applied to disciplines that are more abstract in nature, so things like arts and literature and philosophy, where there maybe isn't a right answer, right? It's all sort of about your interpretation, not as often applied to things like the hard sciences and mathematics, but it could be. The original model includes 4 main positions that students will pass through in order to reach that sort of peak of cognitive maturity. I will say that the expanded version by Baxter-Magolda includes 9 positions. So if this is something that you're interested in, I'd recommend digging a little bit deeper, but today we're only going to talk about the 4. So students would move from position of dualism to multiplicity to relativism, and then finally to commitment. And we'll talk a little bit about what each one of those looks like. So position one, I like to call it the freshman year, dualism. Students come to campus and maybe they are thinking that things are really simple and thinking in black and white terms. Things could be good or bad. Things are true and false. Knowledge is a certainty. My instructors are, experts in their field, so they are all knowing, and I'm going to accept everything that they say at face value. Um, then we move on maybe to position two, sophomore year, multiplicity, where students are starting to understand that there sometimes are uncertainties, that there are multiple opinions and they can be equally valid. They're maybe working through some of that cognitive discomfort, realizing, yes, my instructors are experts in their field, but they're also just people, right? They come to the table with their own, biases and backgrounds and cultures, and they don't know everything that there is to know about the world, even if they know something really concretely about their discipline. Then moving on to the position three, relativism, which maybe that's their junior year, where students start to appreciate even further that knowledge is contextual, that there really is no singular truth, and those absolutisms from that dualist perspective maybe starts to falter. They grow a little bit more comfortable with the ambiguity of the learning process and realize that, people can have different opinions, some of which are valid and supported with facts, and others maybe not so much. So they start to appreciate the importance of evidence and reasoning and critical thinking. And then lastly, let's say they've reached their senior year and they're coming to the position of commitment, where they fully understand the complexity of, the knowledge landscape, where they have created and adopted informed opinions. And further, they're willing to modify those opinions up against new evidence. So they will reassess their commitments and say, you know what, I learned something new and now I think differently about this topic. So really the epitome of that growth that we're hoping students get through a transformational education process. So how would you use this when it comes to program assessment? Again, it can be broken down into sort of verbs that you could apply to your program learning objectives or to creating a rubric, designing assignments. And we've got some samples here. I think you'll find that the verbs are similar kind of across these domains, across these different frameworks and taxonomies that we've talked about. It's really all about the approach, how you think about the learning process and which one resonates most for you. Okay, so there's a few more that we wanted to touch on, but given our limited time, we're not going to go too in depth.
And so these are two lesser known taxonomies. The solo taxonomies tend to use more maybe in the medical side, where, and this is not my wording, this is really the heart of this taxonomy, is that they're trying to get a person from total incompetence to becoming an expert. So they're an expert in cardiology, expert in psychology, an expert in neurology, right? And so there is 5 levels, but it's really going from pre-structural to abstract thinking. And it classifies learning outcomes based on the complexity of understanding. So you're ranging from simple recall and then going a little further. So it's similar to Bloom's, but this is way more of a scaffolded type of taxonomy. The other one is Marzano's. So it's Marzano and Kendall, and they are really coming from a K to 12 perspective, but there is some overlap in higher ed. They too have 3 main components where it's cognition, metacognition, and then how it relates to self. So there are the same where there's like going from a pre-structural to a more structural and a relational abstract when it comes to the taxonomy. Not quite used all that often, but it's another taxonomy that you may want to think about as you are considering your PLOs.
Okay, and then this is a great resource that we found when we were sort of researching and preparing for this workshop. There's a great text that's included in our references at the end of the presentation from Barkley and Major on engaged teaching that talks a lot about assessment methods. And they created this learning goal inventory. It's come out of the University of Alabama. And it's a free tool that faculty can use. It's just a survey that you would click the link. And it's open to anyone to complete. You enter in a little bit of information about, your role, your course, your teaching philosophy, the things that are important to you, to your course or your program, and it will give you tailored feedback on, the types of learning objectives or the types of frameworks and taxonomy that might fit best with your subject matter. So I think this is a great, place to start if you're looking to get more involved in this work, or maybe if you've got a faculty or department retreat coming up, or you want to spark some conversation, you could put this out as a tool for everyone to complete and maybe compare your results. Okay, so wrap up in some resources. We're a small-ish group, so I don't know that we need to do the whole poll. Maybe we can use this as a chance to talk a little bit since we've been talking for a while. But we've gone over these 5 main taxonomies today, quick little summaries in blue for your reference. Are there any that, really stood out to you, that resonated with you, that you would want to adopt in your own teaching?
I'm happy to share. Hi everyone, I'm Sarah. I work in campus residences. And I think for me, a lot of the work I do is more so with our professional staff recruitment, training, and development committee. So more so working with professional staff and not necessarily college age students who are going through their different developmental stages. Of course, I still work with them in the rest of my role, but in thinking about the work that I might be doing for assessment in terms of professional staff training, I really liked Fink's taxonomy on significant learning because how everything like interweaves, where if we're training someone on crisis response, that might interweave with their understanding of student development. And I think that that is really important to acknowledge that not every topic or level of understanding is siloed and it is all interconnected in some way based on like different experiences people might have.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's why I know Diana's a big fan of Finks as well. The way that it's intersectional and more cumulative instead of that sort of strict hierarchy, I think is a lot more practical. I know we use Bloom's a lot because it's kind of clean cut and easy to adopt and use in your course design, your program design, but Finks is probably more reflective of how actual learning takes place, right? It's not so one and done. It's this very cumulative experience over a longer period of time. Anyone else want to jump in?
Agree. I think that was Sarah who was talking, and I agree 100% with what she was saying. What I like about what you gave us is I have to admit, my rubric for teaching is, I don't remember the last time I updated it. So thank you for reminding me. There's so many pearls in what you've given us that I'm like, oh, I got some work to do. So it's really, overall, this has just gotten my brain thinking.
Awesome. All right, so we'll move on. I won't put you all on the spot too much, but hopefully we'll share these slides afterward. And if there's something that resonated with you and you want to consult with us about, please feel free.
So really just to wrap up on the takeaways, there's not one that is like a one size fits all. You really have to think about the what you're doing in the moment, right? So the PLO that you're working on, or the assignment that you're working on, or the training that you're working on, and just to really see which one works best. Excuse me. Because you'll find that maybe you're using 1 or 2 taxonomies to really get at the heart of what you're trying to assess, right? So use what you need, massage as needed, and just really keep tweaking it until it becomes what you are really hoping to assess. Making sure that the data you're getting is always meaningful and that it's able to help you continue and improve your processes. So the last one, oh, sorry. The last one is really, make sure that whatever you're doing is measurable, meaningful, and that at the end of the day, you come out with data that is helpful.
And then just a few resources you might want to check out. Again, I would highly recommend the Berkeley and Major selection, as well as the last two from Nilsson on outcome-centered course design. These are shorter, very accessible. If you want to take a look at something before a faculty retreat, share it with your department. I do think they're great resources. Diana, this one's you, but I'm going to click so I can share this resource while you talk about it. So just give me one moment.
Okay, well, our office has created a repository of every major. And then so you can click, and you see on the left-hand side by, academic level. And if you open up one of them, you'll see that the program learning objectives are there. So you can take this and review it and see if which of the taxonomies might best match up to any of these learning objectives if you wanted to tweak them. And it gives you an idea of what's out there right now, and you can use it as a discussion piece when you bring it back to your different areas.
Okay, so we've got a few minutes. Is there anyone that wanted to jump in? Do you have questions about any of the taxonomies? All right, well, we are here if you
Right.
think of any after the fact. And we just wanted to also always promote the remaining workshops in our series for this semester. We've also got some coming up on AI and assessment, evidence-based examples, and including the student voice, as well as our assessment symposium, which is at the end of this month. Since it's right before Halloween, it's our assessment Fright Fest. Diana, do you want to talk a little bit about Zach?
Yes, so the heart of this is that we want you to take the fear out of assessment. And we have this amazing keynote, Zach Justice from University of California, Chico State, where he's going to talk about really taking a pause for this year to really assess what we're really assessing. Because there's been this uptake of AI. So are we really assessing AI and what it's been doing and how students have been using it? Or are we really assessing students like we have, say, 2, 3, 4 years ago? So it's really to just go in, think about some of the problems you might be having, and then we're going to create some solutions to help you work assessment just a little bit differently. So I hope to see you all there.
And that's it for us. So this is our email. If you have any questions after the fact, or if you want to consult with us one-on-one, we're always happy to do that. Otherwise, we want to respect your time and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right, have a great day.
Bye.